Hey everybody, welcome to your horoscopes for the week. These are the horoscopes for the week ending August 27th. We're at the end of August already, moving into September next week, which means autumn is coming for those of you that are really excited about that. Um, I'm a little excited myself, to be honest with you. That's one of my favorite seasons. We'll put it that way. I have to. I do love spring also. We have a really crazy week this week in terms of how the planets are interacting with each other, both good and bad. So we're just going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to start as we always do with Aries. Still only have Jupiter influencing Aries this week. Jupiter is still retrograde, will continue to be retrograde for another month. It moves direct in October. And the way that Jupiter is interacting with other planets, actually, it's in a very good way. So you guys are very lucky, as Jupiter's continues its trine with Venus about halfway through the week or so. And then towards the end of the week moves into an opposition with Mercury, which is still not retrograde, won't be retrograde until next month. So we start off, really well, and then it kind of turns in the other direction later on in the week. Focus is on your day-to-day schedule. Jupiter's brings the focus of those you love into your sign this week. And so when we start off at the beginning of the week with a trine with Venus, actually, it's kind of interesting because Venus's focus is very much on your career. And with Venus's focus on your career, how do those you love really play into that? Well, believe it or not, they actually play into it. They play a very important role, I should say, in terms of boosting your career, specifically when those that are closest in your inner circle are there to provide assistance when assistance is needed. So this kind of assistance is, childcare when you need childcare and you have to go to work. In some cases, if you're forming or working through your own business, these people can provide fantastic ideas that are really helpful towards boosting your business on the level that you want to boost it on. So this is actually a really good thing. When we move into that opposition with Mercury towards the end of the week, Mercury's focus is on those who love you or those that support you. And this sort of those you love versus those that love you kind of opposition kind of feels a little bit like those that are supposed to support you aren't really supporting you right now. And of course, this can happen for many different reasons. A lot of times maybe they're usually supportive, but unfortunately this week they're busy and nowhere to be found. And it feels like, especially for Aries, I feel like a lot of Aries, especially Aries women, although Aries men are like this too, for a lot of Aries, it just sort of feels like, you're always there to support others. And then when you need help, nobody's around. And a lot of times it's just really bad timing. It's not always the case that they're only there for what they need. And then, screw you if you need their help. There may be a little bit of that in there, but I feel that this is more of a a challenge because it's just bad timing, and the supporters that you would normally have, just they got their own stuff going on. And I feel like in this world right now, this is happening a whole lot, because there's just so many things going on, so many people getting sick, so many so many different variables that just kind of sort of get in the way of that. So as frustrating as it is, you want to make sure that you're not overreacting to something that there really isn't anything that you can do about, if that makes sense. Communication is also really important, and how you communicate is really important. So if you find yourself in this situation, you want to make sure that you communicate your feelings, because you have every right to communicate your feelings without accusations. Accusations, unfortunately, have a tendency to start fights, and we don't want to do that. What is helpful towards the end of the week also is Jupiter's sextile with Mars. Now, Mars being your ruling planet, and Mars being very much focused on your relationships, I feel like those that you think should support you may not be there, but look and broaden your search a little bit, and you may find that support somewhere else. So just keep that in mind while you're doing all of those fantastic things that you're doing. So that is what I have for you guys. And we're going to move on to Taurus. Now, things are really heating up here in Taurus this week. Mars officially leaves your sign. Of course, he is on the cusp of your sign at the beginning of the week. So you're still going to feel that little bit of influence, that little bit of Mars influence going, in there, that sort of fire under your butt to really move forward and push forward, which is good and bad. I feel like if you look at Mars as an ambitious sign, this is a really a good thing for you, because in terms of Taurus being a fixed sign, and it's actually kind of funny. I've met a lot of Tauruses. I met some Tauruses that really their fixed element really shows through in terms of them, their progress being very slow moving. And then I met some Tauruses, specifically Taurus women, that are just like so incredibly ambitious. I mean, they're just constantly moving. They never sit still. It's like I met a lady a long time ago. She wrote a book in a weekend. The whole book was written in a weekend. And so these are Tauruses that hardly ever sleep, and they're just constantly working, which is good, but that kind of pace will burn you out over time. And that's really what we're concerned about in terms of Mars influence. Mars influence leaving for these types of people, however, it may feel like your energy just kind of sort of hits the ground. I don't really know how else to describe it other than, for me personally, I can go and go and go and go and go. And then there's just one day, plans or no plans. There's that day I wake up, my body says, no, you're not doing anything. And my brain says, I concur with that. And we're not doing anything. So it sort of forces me into this rest. And I feel like Mars influence leaving is going to have kind of an energy like that, where it almost just feels like you've been going and going and going, and then you just stop, and you have nothing left. And to be honest with you, I think that in an energy such as this, it's also a good time to take that rest, because we always need that time. We always need that rest time. And it's really important to give yourself that rest time. Moving on to Uranus, let's talk about Uranus here for a minute. Uranus does go retrograde this week, actually on August 24th, and will continue to be retrograde into next year. So at the end of January, we'll go back to that direct motion. Now, with Uranus being the rebel and going against the grain and coming up with these really new and exciting things for you to do that are sort of out of the norm, these really big ideas that nobody has ever thought of yet. Uranus's retrograde totally debunks all of that and sort of comes back to tradition, which I think for Taurus is a little bit easier. So it sort of takes that I have to be a rebel away and kind of smooths it out a little bit. So in that sense, Uranus's retrograde really is in your favor rather than being a problem. with focus on relationships, Uranus is literally literally playing all sides here. We're going to start with the difficulty, and then we're going to move on to how Uranus is actually lining up with planets in a very positive, very helpful way. But we're going to start with the difficulty as we continue a T square now involving Venus as well as Saturn. You know, we've had that square with Saturn for a while. It's sort of been, for a lot of Aquarians and Tauruses that I've talked to, it's sort of been kind of a pain in the rear, if that makes sense. And when we amplify that with Venus moving into Leo, and later on in the week, the moon is going to move into conjunction with Venus, causing this to be a very emotional challenge, if that makes sense. So in terms of how this plays out, Uranus's focus is very much on relationships. Venus's focus is on the career, and Saturn's focus is on the home. And with Venus and Saturn in that opposition, this is what turns this into a much bigger challenge than maybe it was when Uranus and Saturn were just squared with each other. In terms of how this plays out, in many ways, it plays out in such a way where it feels like you're trying to balance your home life and your career life. And in terms of the relationships that you have that are supposed to help you with that, it just sort of feels like they're non-existent in some way. However, if we look at the grand trine, which is a very positive aspect that Uranus is lining up with in terms of Mercury and also Pluto, Pluto's influence, still retrograde, is very much on the mind and how you think about certain things. And Mercury's focus is on those that support you. So while you have this challenging difficulty where you feel like you're split in two different places, in some cases, the relationships that are supposed to be there to help you with that aren't there. But it also shows, this grand trine shows that there are other people, there are other relationships that you have formed that are very much there to help you. So it shows you, it sort of opens up this avenue that maybe you haven't even bothered to look at yet. I'm thinking of a lady that I know who is in the wedding industry right now, and how I would see this playing out for her in her, especially in her business, is looking at the people that normally are there to support her in her business, and all of a sudden they just can't be there. And so it would create this struggle of trying to find a replacement. And if you look hard enough, you will be able to find a replacement. And I also want to say that you want to look in places that you never thought to look before in terms of assistance. A lot of times we get so stuck on the specific type of person, or we always go to the same personnel place, or what have you. This grand trine is coming into saying, change things up a bit, get a little creative, look in places that you haven't normally looked in, because as you're doing that, you wind up broadening your people to choose from, which is really important. So that is what I have for you, Tauruses. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Gemini. We kick off the week with the moon in Gemini, literally like at the very edge of Gemini, which is good, but not without the moon moving into a T square with Neptune and your ruling planet of Mercury. Now, the moon's focus is on money this month, this week, with Neptune's focus on those you love and Mercury's focus on those who support you. it kind of may feel like you're just making money to give it away to other people, which I think we all feel that from time to time. And this might actually create some emotional frustration for you, especially if you have plans for that money. If that money is going towards a specific goal that you're trying to grow at this time. This doesn't mean, obviously, that the goal is done and that you're not going to be able to do what it is that you want to do. It just means that there might be a temporary, um, a temporary setback. So, with that being said, this week there might be a lot of things that come up that require those finances, but that doesn't mean that next week is going to be the same. So, you do want to keep that in mind. Mars is also moving into Gemini this week, and Mars moving into Gemini, I feel that Geminis have like way a lot of energy anyway. So it really sort of, kind of feels like you don't really need any more energy, but you know what? Let's go ahead and give you a little bit more. And that energy coming in actually may just be exactly what you need in order to get the money that you need for those goals when you think about it. So even though there's extra expenses coming up, there's extra money coming in too, which is a definite possibility. Mars does move into Mars does move into an opposition with the sun in Virgo, and also the moon at the very end of the week, as the moon moves into conjunction with the sun, creating a new moon. Um, with the sun and the moon's focus on career, and Mars's focus being on relationships, this may bring up some challenges in relationships around your career. Now, this happens all the time. There is no possible way that we can think that we can work in an environment and just get along with everybody. It's really unrealistic. Those are really unrealistic expectations when you think about that. But in truth, with the moon coming in to influence this creates some added frustration that makes it even more difficult than maybe it should be. My advice for this really is all about how you handle the situation emotionally. Obviously, if you blow up at the person, this is going to create more problems than you need to. And I'm not saying that anger is something that we should avoid. I mean, anger has its place, but it's communicating those feelings that always seems to be a problem for us human beings. So you don't want to over communicate it. You don't want to under communicate it. You just want to be very honest and straight and to the point. If somebody is, is bothering you at work, or they're undermining you in some way, rather than talking behind their back, it's a good idea to just broach the subject directly to them. Hey, I don't appreciate this. And I would very much appreciate it if we could find another way to do this so that it is less threatening for both of us, if that makes sense. Now, the good news is that Mars is moving into this, or continuing this grand trine, I should say, as it moves out of Taurus. It's still throughout the whole week in this grand trine with Pluto and Mercury. And grand trines are really helpful aspects, and they really help you out when there is a challenge present in terms of how the other planets are interacting with each other also. With your ruling planet being Mercury, and Mercury's focus on those that love and support you, and Pluto's focus is on the mind. Now, this is really interesting for you Geminis, because you guys tend to be very mind-centered, right? And this actually is really helpful for this difficult square that's going on with the sun and the moon. Your mind can blow things out of proportion. And so to have Pluto's influence on the mind currently, and especially with Pluto being in retrograde, it's important to really pay attention to how your mind is blowing things out of proportion, if it is blowing things out of proportion, and bring it back to where it needs to be, right? Because the more you bring it back to where it needs to be, it makes it so much easier for you to navigate through that without that explosion. So it's really helpful for that. In terms of Mercury's influence on those that support you, I'm going to say it, okay? As human beings, we have this tendency to have something happen, somebody wrongs us, somebody hurts our feelings, whatever, and we go and find all of these people to agree with us so that it validates how we feel, like we need the validation, right? This is not what we're talking about here, actually. What we're talking about here is building relationships from those that don't support you to those that do support you. And in this case, you may find that if you communicate these feelings with this person in the best way possible, you may find yourself actually getting a new friend or a new acquaintance, or that relationship changing from being a very competitive relationship to being a relationship where the two of you work together actually very well and support each other. So it really is up to you in terms of how you deal with this situation. Deal with it in the right way. You might get some results that surprise you. Deal with it in the way that everybody always deals with it, and it's just going to stay the same relationship that it always has been, which is usually the case. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to move on to Cancer. No planets in Cancer this week, which is not a bad thing, considering how they're really lining up in some very interesting ways. The only influence that we have in Cancer this week is the Lilith or dark moon. And with focus being on long-term goals, having the Lilith or dark moon as your influence in there is actually kind of interesting, because it is sort of challenging you to create your goals in a very different way than you have previously. Now, Cancers tend to be very careful. They tend to tread very carefully, almost so carefully that they don't even get anything done. And that's not necessarily the best thing for success. They're the best recipe for success, I should say. Sometimes you have to take risks, and this is what a Lilith is all about. I did describe a little bit of the mythology behind the dark moon a little bit last week, but I'll just focus on her complete change from being a very strict Puritan woman with rules that could not be broken, otherwise you would be shunned, to this wild, crazy lady who lives in the woods kind of a thing. And so with that being said, in terms of your long-term goals, I feel that this week really is all about taking those goals, looking at them, and instead of looking at creating goals that are easy, we're going to take a little bit of a risk here, and we're going to create something that challenges us a little bit. I don't feel that most Cancers really like to be challenged a whole lot, but that's why it's so important to challenge yourself. Every single sign has its good traits and its not so good traits. And sometimes those not so good traits hold us back. And our whole journey with our astrological sign is to either turn those bad traits into something that's useful for us, or learn how to overcome them if they happen to be really holding us back. So I feel like this is what the Lilith is all about for you guys this week. It's about really expanding on what you think you can do without fear, without all the what ifs, what could happen here and there. And I mean, all of that stuff is bound to happen, of course, but we don't do it because we know that they're not going to happen. We do it in spite of those things. And that's really what it's all about for you guys this week. So that is what I have for you. Good luck with that. Be bold and be brave. I want to be proud of you guys this week. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Leo. We've got Venus in Leo, which means that we are in a T square with Uranus and Saturn again. Luckily, I think for about another week, maybe a little bit into next week, and then that's going to break up, and then we're good to go after that. Unfortunately, the moon comes into your sign on Thursday, moving into conjunction with Venus, and this makes this T-square challenge even more difficult. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to move on to the aspects that actually are a little bit helpful, because we do have some help this week. Believe it or not, we do have some help this week. But we're going to start with this T-square. Venus and the moon on Thursday move into opposition with Saturn, and both, all three planets, I should say, move into squared positions with Uranus. Now, this creates what's called a T-square. It takes a small challenge and amplifies it and makes it much bigger. With your focus on your career and long-term goals this week, that opposition with Saturn, which is very much focused on your home, and Uranus, which is now in retrograde this week, focused on relationships. It may feel like where you're trying to shine in your career and where you're trying to come up with creative ways to advance your career is just not working, unfortunately. It feels like no matter what you do, you're, instead of taking, a step forward, it's like taking a step forward in quicksand. You wind up taking a step forward, but it feels like you're still stuck where you were a minute ago. And that's really frustrating. Rather than trying to push through that, it's actually really important to sit down and understand why this is happening. A lot of times this happens because we don't have everything set up to be able to move forward. We're missing something. So it's really a good idea to take a look at everything that you've done so far. Make sure that you haven't left anything out, or you haven't forgotten anything, or there isn't a step that you should have taken that you forgot to take. This happens a lot. Especially with fiery signs like Leo. You just want to move forward, move forward, move forward. And then you wind up forgetting something. So if you're forgetting something, it's not going to allow you to move forward. Look at it that way. The universe is like, wait a minute, you forgot something here. You need to go backwards, fix that. And then the quicksand sort of dries up and you can move forward. Now, for most of the week, up until the very end of the week, Venus and the moon also on Thursday does play a part in this as well. Moves into or starts off the week with a trine with Jupiter. Now, Jupiter's focus is on those that you love. So kind of weird when we're talking about our career goals. But when you think about it, those that you love actually can be helpful in some cases when it comes to your career growth. Those people actually, because they're not in the situation, as you're sitting down and you're discussing the problem with them, actually can help you find the solution to your problem also. And it can be a no-brainer to them, even though it's something that you may be struggling with, if that makes sense. So there is definitely some help on the horizon for you, even if it feels like you're completely alone, kind of sort of floating out in that ocean by yourself. The truth is that you're never really 100% alone, and you're never really 100% floating around by yourself. It's just that is how we perceive that at the time. So that is what I have for you guys. I promise you that things are going to calm down soon. I promise. And when they do, they're going to remain that way for quite a while, with the exception of the moon going in there. And since the moon's in there this week, you have a whole month before that happens again. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Virgo because it is the beginning, officially the beginning of Virgo season this week. I think that Virgos and Leos, but I think that Virgos really celebrate their time better than any other zodiac sign does. And that kind of has to do with their little bit of narcissistic traits there. Now, narcissistic and narcissism are two completely different things, even though they come from the same place. Every Virgos are known to have narcissistic traits. That does not necessarily mean that every Virgo is a narcissist either. There is a big difference, and narcissists come in every sign. So, just wanted to put that out there. It is the beginning of Virgo season as the moon moves into Virgo this week. I'm sorry, the sun moves into Virgo this week. That's what makes Virgo season. And as Mercury is moving out of Virgo this week, we're also going to be seeing some pretty crazy stuff going on this week. We're going to start with Mercury's opposition to Pluto and Neptune. Neptune and Pluto both being retrograde currently right now. So Neptune's retrograde really has a tendency to amplify our intuitive abilities, our psychic empath mediumship abilities. And Jupiter's retrograde is very interesting. With Jupiter all about growth and expansion, that retrograde seems to slow that down, slow that process down a little bit. Both signs are really focused on those you love. Mercury's focus is on those that love you or those that support you. And I kind of feel like this is going to play out for you guys in terms of being very supportive to other people and then finding that they're not as supportive of you when you need the support. This happens a lot to a lot of people. And most of the Virgos that I know are very quick to jump up and help with a situation that they may need to help with, but not necessarily used to people reciprocating that, if that makes sense. And so I really feel that what's going to happen in terms of this opposition for you guys this week is sort of that last straw moment, that moment where you're like, you know what, I'm sick and tired of helping other people and getting crapped on when I need the help. It really is frustrating, or it really can be frustrating, I should say. The moon moving into your sign at the end of the week really kind of helps that frustration continue as the moon moves into conjunction with the sun. And the sun, of course, is squared with Mars. Now, Mars is all about relationships. The sun and the moon are focused on career. In terms of your career relationships, you could find these frustrations coming up at work, to be honest with you, in terms of the relationships going on with your coworkers or with the people that you are in business with, which creates a little bit of a challenge. Now, let's stop talking about the challenge and let's talk about the good stuff, okay? Because Mercury, of course, is still in a grand trine with Mars as well as Pluto. Now, Pluto's focus is all on the mind and how the mind works. And you Virgos have kind of an active mind there, we will say, ruled by Mercury. Of course, you have an active mind, right? Mars influence in your relationships actually kind of shows you when you're feeling like you've helped everybody and there's nobody there to help you. It shows you that most of the time your thoughts are on the negative. Your thoughts are on those that should help you, but they're not because you've helped them before. Mars energy kind of sort of busts open this thing and says, hey, guess what? These are not the only supporters you have. You have so many other supporters out there that could be helping you. You're just focused on these two people who are causing a problem for you this week. So it sort of opens that up a little bit and changes the energy of how you're looking at this situation. Instead of being upset that these two people aren't supporting you when they should be, it's broadening it out to show you that you have a tremendous amount of support because you've built this tremendous support system. And those two people don't really matter in the long run. So when you look at it in those terms, it doesn't feel quite so heavy. You don't feel quite so offended. You don't feel so much like there's nobody out there to help you, because it's opening things up to show you that you have all the help you need, really. So that is what I have for you guys. And we're going to move on to Libra. The very end of the week, Mercury moves into Libra, literally ending the week with 1 degree in Libra. And the good news about that is, well, there's good news and bad news. We're going to say there's good news and bad news. We'll start with the bad news, because as Mercury moves into Libra, it's also in opposition with Neptune and Jupiter. Now, both planets are retrograde. Both planets very much focused on those that you love. Mercury's focus is on those that love you or those that support you. It may feel like you're not really getting the support coming from the area that you think it should be coming from, specifically your family. So we're looking at the possibility of something happening this week where you're like, that's okay, I can rely on this person, no problem. And then that person comes up and says, no, I have plans that day and I just can't help you out. And so your first response is going to be obviously a frustration and anger. You had it all planned out. Now you got to go back to the drawing board. You got to plan it all out again, right? It's a little bit complicated. Now let's focus on the good news. The good news is that Mercury's grand trine with Pluto, which is retrograde, and very much focused on how you think, and Mars, which is focused on relationships and the energy behind your relationships. Now, anytime you feel stuck, anytime you feel like you don't have the support that you need, you look to Mars in this instance, which shows you a tremendous amount of support. Really, all these people that are there and have been supportive before. And so you're stuck on this one person here, and the one person is not your only support. That is what really is this is all about. Also, Pluto's influence on how you think is really important. Libras are intellectual signs, but they are emotional signs at the same time. They are the most emotional of the 3 intellectual signs, being ruled by Venus, which is rather an emotional planet. With that being said, a lot of times, Libras will look at things emotionally, will take offense to it emotionally. And that's not how you want to look at this in this particular situation. I know it's hard not to, but that's not how you want to look at this in this particular situation. Depending on the situation that you're in, the more emotionally you think about it and look at it, the more devastating it's going to be for you. And that is going to create a much more difficult challenge if you choose to let that happen. Instead, focus on changing how you think about this situation. So, for example, if you're on a project and you have a specific person in mind that's going to help you with this project, and at the last minute they bail on you, you have 2 choices. You could be flip-flopping around in your mind thinking about how this person bailed on you and how you're never going to work with them on this project again and how blah blah blah. Or you can omit that altogether and look at it in terms of, okay, so I don't have this person on the project, but it might be better if I have somebody else on the project. So maybe I should take a look and see. This is a more productive way of looking at the situation so that it's not quite so emotional, for lack of a better word. And when you take the emotion out of it, it becomes a lot easier to work with. Of course, we can't take the emotion out of everything. That is absolutely impossible. But I feel in this instance, it's very necessary, because the more you look at it emotionally, the longer it's going to take for you to find a resolution. And that's going to be a problem. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to move on to Scorpio. It's all about you, Scorpios, this week. And with no planet influences, it's going to be awesome, right? Focus is on self for you guys this week. And when your focus is on self-care obviously comes up a lot. But in terms of, it's not just about self-care. A lot of times focus on self is all about focusing on who you are and making sure that that's who you want to be. I think that for most of us, we go through life, circumstances happen, how we react to those circumstances sort of changes us into the people and how we react to certain situations. And that's not necessarily the case. We are not ruled by the situations that happen to us. We're ruled by how we react and how we choose to grow with those situations. And so I feel that this week really is all about that. It's about taking stock of how you deal with these specific situations and really looking at it in terms of, is this how you want to deal with these situations? And if it's not, do you want to continue dealing with these situations in the same way? Because maybe that might be something that you don't want to do. And if you don't sit back and think about it, it never changes. You just have this automatic reaction that keeps on going and going and going. Not exactly how you want to live your life, right? You don't want past circumstances ruling your current reaction. That just doesn't make any sense. And it does not line up with the growth process that as human beings, we're supposed to have. So this week really is all about that. It's about taking that time to really pay attention to, am I the person that I want to be, or am I the person that circumstances made me? And when you ask yourself that question, you actually might be pretty surprised by the answer. But it also gives you the opportunity to take stock of that and decide where you want to go from here. Do you want to continue to react in the same way, or do you want to develop yourself into a different individual, a better individual, more enlightened individual, however you want to say those words anyways. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving on to Sagittarius. Again, no planets in Sagittarius this week, not necessarily a bad thing, because all the signs that have planets in them are just causing a little bit of crazy chaos there from time to time. It happens. Focus is on the past. And this is actually very interesting this week in terms of having your focus on the past. We've been there the past couple of weeks in terms of how that focus is. However, it's really important, actually, I feel, when we are focused on the past, to really pay attention to how we're looking at that focus, if that makes sense. I've talked about your focus on the past being to help you currently, or to sort of take a look at how things were done in the past and improve on it now. But this week, I really feel that the focus on the past for you guys really has a lot to do with how you cope with things. I feel like these days, there's just so much happening in the world right now, and it is affecting all of us. And I sort of remember at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, where we were all kind of, weirded out by it, because it was very strange to live in this sort of isolated world that we all of a sudden found ourselves in. But also, I remember personally feeling like, if as long as it doesn't touch my family, it's okay. And we went through the whole first year where it didn't, almost the whole second year. And then that's where all of a sudden, one by one, it started to affect various different parts of my family. And I feel like when we're in a situation now, as we're into the third year of this pandemic and really seeing who's here and who's not. We're dealing with people who were sick that aren't sick anymore, but there's changes now that we have to deal with in terms of their own care. The economy is just ridiculous these days. Service has gone down the toilet. Businesses don't run like they used to. It's a very different world. And it's very easy to look back on when the world, quote unquote, was better than it is now. And to be able to just sort of look at that in terms of, I wish that the world hadn't changed the way that it did. The truth of the matter is that Sagittarians generally are, in many ways, the pioneers of change. They like to go against the grain. They like to, they definitely like to go against the grain of society and what society thinks they should be and they should do. And in terms of their energy, they really are in many ways pioneers of change. However, I also feel that because the world has changed so much, even Sagittarians are having a hard time keeping up with this, with these changes. So I feel that this week it really is all about taking a look at that change, taking a look at how you did things in the past, and sort of finding a happy middle ground there to be able to live in this new world, because let's face it, it's not going anywhere, unfortunately. It may improve. We may find ourselves in a situation where it's more tolerable than it is now. And I feel like you Sagittarians are really what's going to help with that, because we need that kind of energy to really fix this problem in a way. And for you individually, it's about coming up with ideas and plans that are going to align with those changes for you personally. And as we individually change, we sort of promote and create this change as a whole. It sort of amplifies out into the world. So that's an awful lot of work for you guys to do when you think about it, but it also helps to give you something to focus on. You can't be stuck in the past, because that doesn't help you move forward. But what you can do is sort of try and recreate those elements of the past that are drawing you back, in such a way that it helps amplify it out to the rest of the world, so that we still have our roots, and yet we're busting out of tradition and into this whole new world. And I think that the chaos that this new world is creating, we need our Sagittarians to help us really navigate through this chaos, because let's face it, nobody understands chaotic energy like you guys do. So we're all looking to you to help us out, guys. So that is what I have for you guys. And now we're moving on to Capricorn. We still have Pluto in Capricorn. Pluto is still retrograde, will continue to be retrograde through the week. No other planets coming in to influence us, which is good. And Pluto is actually moved into two very fantastic aspects. Capricorn is literally the only sign that has positive aspects and no challenging ones. Good for you guys. So we're going to start with the biggie, the grand trine between Pluto and Mercury and Mars. Mars energy is fantastic energy going into what it is that you're doing. Mercury's focus is on those that support you. Mars' focus is on your relationships. And Pluto's focus, Capricorn's focus, is on how you think about those two things right there. Now, in terms of the support system, most Capricorns that I know are not looking for a support system. They can do it all on their own. And here's the thing, every once in a while, you just can't do that. You need support. You need somebody to help you out. And I feel like Pluto's retrograde, where it's slowing down that sort of transformative energy that Pluto has, is actually helping you to be able to not just to see that sometimes you need help, but to be able to accept that help, if that makes sense. Also, in terms of Mars energy within your relationships, is sort of busting out and showing you just how much quality support you really have, even though that's not necessarily an idea that you entertain very often. And just because it's not an idea that you entertain very often doesn't mean that it's not there. We also have Pluto lining up with a in a grand sextile with Neptune and Uranus this week as well. All three planets are retrograde, and retrograde seems like a challenge, but at the same time, it can be helpful. Sometimes the planet's direct movement is a bit much for us. When you sling it back to that retrograde, it creates an energy that's helpful, especially for earth signs. It's helpful, but it's not overly pushy, if that makes sense. And with Neptune's retrograde amplifying your intuitive abilities, and Pluto's energy sort of getting you out of your own head, this is exactly what you need to do in order to even access those intuitive abilities. You throw Uranus in there, focused on your relationships, and what you have is this huge opening of your own vision that sees just how much support you really have, because you really haven't been paying attention. You haven't needed it. And I feel like this is happening because you are going to need some support this week. And when you need support, it's really important to be able to admit that it's okay to need support every now and then. I know that's hard. It is okay to admit that you need support every now and then. Also okay to accept help, and not just to accept help in terms of making sure that they do things your way, but being accepting of allowing people to help and do it their way. That's really important. Maybe your way isn't going to work in this particular scenario or situation. And if that is the case, you want somebody to come in with a different energy, a different perspective, and a different way of doing it. When that happens, all of a sudden what you're creating is so much better than you ever thought it could be. So in terms of your goals, this is really important, to allow that other energy to come in. I have a great example actually in terms of my grandmother, who's a Capricorn, very independent, never asked for help from anybody ever. It's just not her style. She just doesn't do that. She's 89 years old right now. So of course she needs support. She needs people to help her. And the more she denies that help, the more I'm in there pushing for that help. No, I'm going to do it. I'm already up. Let me just do it, kind of a thing. And what we're doing here is we're creating this relationship. Not that we didn't have a relationship before, but as an Aquarius and a Capricorn, it was a very different type of relationship. She was always telling me the best way to do things. I was always telling her that's not how I want to do it. I want to do it the opposite way of that. Now we're coming together in a way to where she's using the way that she does things and I'm using the way that I do things, and it comes together in this beautiful mix. And so this is really what this week is all about for you guys. It's bringing that beautiful mix together and allowing your support system to come in and bring their magic to the table, because that is really what's important. And it doesn't mean that you don't have enough magic of your own and you need them. It just means that this is an added bonus magic that maybe you weren't planning on before, and it turned out to be exactly the kind of magic that you needed. So think about it in those terms, and that is what I have for you guys. And we are going to move on to Aquarius. Saturn is still there. Saturn is still retrograde. Will continue to be retrograde through October. Most everybody's retrograde through October, it seems, or at least a bunch of them anyways, that are retrograde now. I know Jupiter and Saturn are both ending in October, so that's good. Continuing a very difficult T-square as Venus moves into opposition with Saturn. And of course, we continue to have that square with Uranus there. So that is a little bit of a challenge. Continuing, yay. Luckily, Venus will be out of there in a couple of weeks. And then we're just going back to the square instead of a great big T-square. Focus is on the home this week, with Venus's focus on your career, hopefully giving you a little bit of a creative way of looking at building your career. At least in theory, that's how that's supposed to work. And Uranus is focused on relationships. Now, this opposition can make you feel like you're toggling back and forth between your home duties and your career duties. This is a big problem for most women and has been for a really long time. And the relationships around you are not making this any easier. To me, I interpret this as feeling like I don't have the support in order to be able to handle everything that I need to do. And trust me when I say I'm an Aquarius, there's a lot of things I need to handle right now. When I feel like I don't have the support at home, it sort of makes me feel really overwhelmed as I'm trying to basically do everything by myself. And that is really a crappy way to feel. I'm going to tell you right now that is a very crappy way to feel, especially when you have people there. They're just not they're not providing the assistance. With that being said, a lot of times this happens. A lot of families find themselves in this situation. And so my best advice is, usually when you're in this situation, what happens, there's an argument, everybody's arguing back and forth, nothing's getting resolved. We continue to have the problem, and we continue to have the problem over and over and over again. Communication really is key in navigating through this challenge, and allowing yourself to, or allowing the other person to really fully understand where you're coming from. Obviously, if you're angry and screaming with them, they're going to get defensive. So there is no understanding of where you're coming from if they're defensive, right? Instead, when you sit somebody down and you say, you know what, I'm trying to do this to make it easier on everybody so that things run smoothly, then all of a sudden the person has the opportunity to understand where you're coming from, rather than feel like you're just constantly picking on them all the time. And Aquarians, and I'm responsible also being an Aquarian myself, Aquarians can have very abrupt and brusque communication. So it really does sound like we're telling people what to do. And that right there, I'm telling you, if I had a dime for every time that happened, I'd have a ton of dimes right now, because it's not about being non-emotional. For an Aquarian, it's like, this is how it is. Either you help me or you don't help me. You don't help me, I'm going to move on to somebody who's going to help me. It sounds like a threat, but it's not meant as a threat. So that being said, yes, I get that that's how you communicate, But that doesn't mean that you can't find a new way of communicating also that will make the situation a little bit easier for you. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And finally, we're going to move on to Pisces. We still have Neptune in Pisces. We continue to have Neptune in Pisces. Neptune is in an opposition with Mercury this week. Neptune's a retrograde. Again, Neptune retrogrades sort of feel like it amplifies your intuitive abilities a little bit. And that can be really confusing if you're not used to that. And then we add an opposition to Mercury with Neptune's focus on those you love and Mercury's focus on those that support you. It sort of feels like you don't have the support that you need. And with Pisces, a lot of times Pisces, it's an emotional sign. So being an emotional sign, Pisces can unfortunately have some emotional communication, and that's not always helpful in certain situations. On top of that, if you are picking up intuitively on things and not really understanding what you're picking up on, that can scare you like nobody's business. And when you get scared, you tend to emotionally communicate even more. And this is what this opposition is all about. It's saying that no matter, you could be sitting there going, I don't know, no matter how many different ways I say this, not realizing that you haven't changed the way that you've communicated at all. And so you really want to honestly evaluate every single one of those conversations, specifically if you seem to be having the same conversation over and over and over again. As you're doing this evaluation, you may find that there are holes in the way that you're communicating. Maybe the timing of your communication is off. Maybe the words that you're using, the feeling behind the words that you're using, all of those different things have the possibility of being a little bit off. And when they're a little bit off, they're not necessarily solving the problem. Now, the good news is that Neptune's grand sextile with Pluto and Mars is really very helpful and helping you get through this. Pluto's focus is on the mind and also retrograde. Uranus is retrograde too by the end of the week. So you've got 3 planets in a very helpful aspect, all retrograde, right? Pluto's retrograde is very helpful actually in this sense, because with Pluto's focus on how you think, when you tend to think emotionally, you tend to think it sort of flip-flops through your mind over and over and over. Now, Pluto's retrograde is going to help slow that racing down, that flip-flop that's going on. Almost like it's helping to eliminate that emotional tornado that you put yourself in. Uranus's retrograde is also very helpful because Uranus is all about rebellion. It's all about fighting against whatever it is that's bothering you or causing the problem right now. And when you have Uranus in retrograde, it sort of dampens that fight down a little bit. Now, that doesn't mean that that's it, you have no fight left. So you might as well not even try anymore. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it takes away the need to fight about it and offers up a chance to actually have a discussion about it. Now, in terms of relationships, which is what Uranus's main focus is, and of course, we've got Neptune's focus and Pisces focus on those that we love. In terms of relationships are always tricky because it doesn't matter how much you love somebody, you're going to have problems in that relationship. You're not going to get along. You're not going to see eye to eye. You're going to deal with that person having a problem that you can't solve and that you have no power to resolve in some ways. And that's really frustrating. And it kind of leaves you in this space of, what do I do about this? In that sense, by retrograding all this energy down a little bit and taking the fight out of it, I like to look at those types of situations for myself personally. My husband and I have sort of created this space where instead of fighting about something, we bring it to the business table, we bring it to the conference room table, and we act like our marriage is a business. We're both intellectual science, so this helps. We act like our marriage is a business, and we have specific bullet points that we need to discuss non-emotionally as much as possible. But granted, emotion does get in there from time to time, and that's okay. There's a way to show how you feel about something without being frustrated or angry about it, or even hurt about it. And the biggest piece of advice that I can give is to find that way of communicating it. If you are standing there saying, I've communicated this every possible way and there's no way to fix this, you have not communicated it in every possible way. Because if you had, you would have found a solution to fix the problem. So basically, what it's all about this week is to take that opposition from with Mercury, which is clearly saying you're not communicating this correctly, and to bring that together and find a new way of communicating the problem so that you can find a resolution to the problem, because that is really what it's all about. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And that is what I have for this week, period. I hope you guys are enjoying the horoscopes. Donations are definitely welcome. And there is a link in the description for that. We are 1 week away from launching the 13 card tarot for 2023. We are almost at 2023. And September 1st, those readings become available. This week, I will be doing pre-orders to get my first list of people ready for that first week of September. So if you are interested, the link to purchase those products will also be below in the description. And of course, you can always private message me or email me. And my email, of course, is here on the channel. Thanks so much for hanging out and watching. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Sidekick, and I will see you guys next week in September. Have a good one.